Welcome to today's interview, where we have the privilege of speaking with Representative Walter Hudson. Walter Hudson, the esteemed representative for Minnesota House District 30A, a passionate advocate for his constituents. Representative Hudson has dedicated his career to addressing the pressing issues facing his communities, from education to health care to economic development and public safety. Yes, Representative Hudson, welcome to Somali TV.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
Representative Hudson, let me start with the first question. Who is Walter Hudson?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? So I'm a first-term state representative in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I live in Albertville, which is about 40 minutes northwest of here. Mm-hmm. It's an exurb of the Twin Cities in Wright County. Northeastern Wright County is my district, so I have Rockford Township, Hanover, St. Michael, Albertville, and about half of Otsego. Mm-hmm. And I'm on the Public Safety Committee and the Children and Families Committee. And I also served on the City Council in Albertville for 7 years prior to that.
Can you share with us your journey into politics? What personal experiences or events motivated you to run for the Minnesota House of Representatives? And how do you believe your background influences your approach to serving your constituents in District 38?
Sure. So I grew up in a very conservative household, although it wasn't a political household. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and they do not participate in politics. And so my mom and dad were never political. We didn't do a whole lot of political conversations around the dinner table or anything like that. But as I grew older, eventually I left that tradition. And as I came of age as a teenager and was exposed to the political conversation, it didn't take me long to realize that the values and the principles that I was raised with really are better represented by the conservative side of the conversation and the Republican Party. And so I was very interested in politics at an early age. I was very interested in radio and media at an early age. And that translated into the things that I chose to do as a young adult. Then I met my wife. Life happens, we travel for her to go to school, we come back to Minnesota, and about the time we had our first son, I started getting involved in what at the time was called the Tea Party movement, which is this kind of grassroots conservative movement that popped up. And everything just kind of cascaded from there. I mean, it took time, but I was involved in media, writing, doing things on the radio and TV. And through all those processes, you meet people and you get to know folks in the party. And I didn't have any aspirations to eventually run for public office, but the opportunity presented itself first for City Council in Albertville when there was an open seat that nobody filed for. And so I ran a very light write-in campaign, and all you need to do is get one more vote than the person who comes in second, and that prevailed. And then with the legislative opportunity, every 10 years we do the census in the United States, and they redraw all the political maps, and it creates openings, and one of those openings was in the House District in 30A, and so I threw my hat in the ring and pursued it, and the rest is history.
We sometimes hear that the Republican Party do not welcome people of minority or people of color or the minority people, and you are working with them. You are now elected official from the Representative Party.
Right.
What do you make of that?
That's never been my experience. It's never been my experience that I've been either rejected or suppressed or quieted in any way or unwelcome in the Republican Party or in the conservative culture. I represent a district that's 96% white. And they voted for me, and I'm running for re-election, and I anticipate that they're going to elect me again. And I really think that this narrative that conservatives and Republicans are against minorities is just prima facie false. In fact, the racism that I encounter on a day-to-day basis almost exclusively comes from the left side of the aisle in terms of their assumptions about what I should think and what I should say and how I should feel and how I should subordinate my values, the things that I believe in, to their narratives and their agenda and what it is that they want to push in terms of public policy. So for instance, it's really important to me to protect my family, to provide for my family. I think that's a universal value that communities across the state share. And yet, when we talk about things like supporting law enforcement to ensure that we get bad actors off the street and that children can play safely in the streets, you get this pushback, and I get accused as a black man of somehow feeding into systemic racism, which of course is utter and complete nonsense. There's nothing that I have to fear from our criminal laws being enforced, because I myself am not a criminal and I'm not raising criminals, and I don't want criminals living around me. I want to live in peace.
What are the key issues you believe are most pressing for your constituents, people who elect you all the time?
Well, I think the first thing is the economy, right? Being able to put food on the table, being able to pay the bills. And I think more fundamentally than that, just the sense of dignity and honor and respect that comes with feeling like you can make it, feeling like you can provide not just the essentials for the people that you love and care about, but also some of the little pleasures in life as well, right? Like feeling like you can get ahead. I think that's really important to people, and folks feel a lot of strain in the current economic environment. The way I put it is, I see people who are struggling to look like they're not struggling. They're trying to put on a tough lower lip, a tough face of I'm okay, but in the quiet of night, they're worried, they're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to fill up their gas tank, whether or not they're going to be able to put food on the table. And that's something that really does need to be addressed by those of us who've been entrusted as public trustees, as public servants, to ensure that we're not making the problem worse by exacerbating the spending from the government side and what have you. I think the other two issues, I'll put education as number two. Because so the economic concern is a present concern. It's like, I need to eat today, right? So the economy, I think, definitely is the top thing on people's mind. But when you look to tomorrow, education is extraordinarily important. Being able to raise up your kids and raise them up in the way that they should go. And having that guided by your values and your beliefs and what's important to you, and what you believe and trust will actually set them up to be successful in the future. And also, I think it's important to be able to preserve your culture, right? To be able to preserve your traditions, to be able to preserve what it is that you value in your life. That's part of what having a family and building a community is all about, is being able to replicate what has worked for generations in the past, moving forward into the future. And education is a big component of that. And I think what we've seen in terms of how education has been handled in the state is it's been very heavy-handed, it's been very top-down, it's very much the state will tell you how it's gonna go, we don't care what you think. And a lot of the mandates have been frankly offensive to a lot of traditional values that people hold, and it isn't in one community. Across the state, regardless of people's religious affiliation or their cultural background, everybody has personal beliefs that they want to be able to convey to their children, and the state should have nothing to say about that.
Got it. So when it comes to the Somali people who live in this state in Minnesota, they are mostly conservative people who respect their religion and wondering how is the future going to look like when it comes to education or the school choice or all those things.
Right.
So as a conservative party, what are the values that you share, and what would you like to tell them today, these people, the Somali people who are watching you today, Representative Hudson?
Well, first and foremost, you are the parent of your child. You are the heads of your household. You should be the ones who are determining what values and culture is going to be inculcated within your children. Somebody else from outside, somebody else from the state shouldn't be coming in and saying, you are going to have to teach this, you're going to have to believe that, you can't say X, Y, or Z. That everything should be controlled to the furthest extent possible at the most local level. We have this concept in Minnesota of independent school districts. That's what we call them, but they're really not independent at all. I mean, they take their marching orders from St. Paul, and that affects school districts throughout Minnesota. And what it really does is it hamstrings the ability of people in their local communities to decide how their schools are going to be administered. So when you brought up school choice, that's something that I think is many years down the road in Minnesota, just because of the current political dynamic and who holds power in which branches of government. But in the immediate term, even just looking to 2025, assuming we have divided government, I think pursuing the concept of choice at the school district level and empowering school boards and communities to have schools that service their kids the way they decide they should be serviced should be a priority.
Community engagement is vital for effective representation. And how do you stay connected with the residents of District 30A? And what strategies do you employ to ensure their voices are heard in the legislative process?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think engagement is a word that sounds fancier than the reality actually is. Like, engagement is just living and being authentic and having conversations and talking to people. So it's the day-to-day stuff. It's going to the grocery store. It's sending your kids to school. It's attending church or whatever house of worship that you attend on a weekly basis, and being part of the community. And so through those day-to-day touching the grass, smelling the roses type activities, you get a decent sense of where your community is at. And again, I think there are universal values that everyone generally believes in and accepts. They want their loved ones to be safe. They want their kids to be educated and have a future. They want the opportunity to earn dignity and honor through productive work. And that's where the government should be focused, is on providing people with a game board, a fair balanced table where everybody has the opportunity to pursue those goals without being kicked around by bureaucrats and political agendas.
Good. Looking back at your time in House, what accomplishments are you most proud of?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting coming in as a first-term member. It's my first time in the state House of Representatives in the minority. So, we're getting kicked around, right? Like, the Democrats get to do whatever they want under a trifecta. So they've got the governor's office, they've got the Senate, they've got the House. And so in that context, especially for somebody who, I consider myself very deeply conservative, some might describe me as a firebrand, right? How is it possible for somebody like me to accomplish anything in that environment? And yet it has occurred. So there were a couple of bills in particular that I was very proud to have had a hand in shepherding through the legislative process. And they were both kind of in a similar category. So in 2023, we passed the Indian Family Preservation Act, which was designed to ensure that the children of tribal families, to the best of our ability as a state and as counties, are kept with their family or in their community, rather than being taken out and put someplace where they know no one and they're ripped out from their culture, and it becomes a loss both for them as children and for the community and for the family. And then in 2024, there was a very similar provision called the African American Family Preservation Act that was targeted. It had African American in the name, but in the actual statutory language, what it did is it extended that to all peoples who have a disproportionate amount of negative impact from the Child Protective Services space. So if you're in a group of people who you're more likely to encounter, you're more likely to have your child removed from your home, and more likely to not be reunited with them, this bill targets that and says, no, let's not be cavalier or apathetic about this. Let's take active efforts to ensure that kids are with their families. And again, I think that's a universal value. And it's something that, and I should say this, lest I be accused of taking credit for something that I did not start. This is something that, first of all, the author was Representative Esther Abaje, who's a Democrat. Representative Cedric Frazier played a big role in getting across the finish line. My understanding is it was previously shepherded by Senator Bobby Joe Champion, who was the president of the state Senate at this time. All these people are Democrats. And there are many, many other people who deserve credit for getting this thing, because it's been in contention for about 30 years, as I understand it. They've been trying to get this bill across the line. And so the role that I played was very limited. What I did was I worked to translate to other Republicans the need for this bill, because there's this kind of instinctive, well, if the other people are for it, then we're against it type of mentality that often pops up. But in this case, due to being on the council for Minnesotans of African heritage and having worked very closely in the committee where it was first heard, the Children and Families Committee, I recognize that this idea was actually very well aligned with conservative values. And as a result, we were able to pass those bills off the floor unanimously. Not a single person voted against them.
Got it. What are your long-term goals for your tenure? And how do you hope to leave a lasting impact in your district and the state of Minnesota?
Well, I think my long-term goal is to no longer be necessary, right? Like my long-term goal is to get the state to a point where it's so comfortable and peaceful and sustainable and functions so well that I can go do something else. I don't have to do this political stuff anymore. Now, I enjoy doing political stuff, don't get me wrong. I enjoy the commentary space and the activism and all of that. But I think that's kind of a key difference between the approach that I bring to the table and the approach that seems to be manifest on both sides of the aisle, really, by many other folks, which is they figure out a way to make a living off of conflict. And so the idea of arriving at a solution that actually puts us in a place of peace and balance and harmony and sustainability is actually a danger. It's a threat to their livelihood, right? What I would like to see is for us to actually solve problems, to actually have sustainable state government going forward, to actually be able to leave families and Minnesotans in a place where they can have confidence that they're going to be able to prosper, not just now, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and that their children and grandchildren will be able to do the same.
As we look to the future, what is your vision for District 30A and Minnesota as a whole?
Yeah.
How do you see your role in shaping policies that promote economic growth, as you mentioned earlier, and also social justice and community well-being in the years to come?
So my district in particular is right on the cutting edge of where the metro ends and greater Minnesota begins. And the city, the motto of the city that I live in, Albertville, is small town living, big city life. So there's this kind of balance that people are looking for. And when people move out to my district, they want to have the things that come to mind when you think about small town living. Quiet streets, kids playing outside, being able to leave your door unlocked, that kind of sense of security and peace and what have you. But at the same time, they also want growth. They want to see new businesses. They want to see new industry. They want to see the tax base increase, and they recognize that there is coming a point at some point in the future where that line of where Metro and Greater Minnesota begins is going to move further west from where it currently is in Albertville. And so the task, as I see it, and it extends all the way down to city councils and what have you, county commissions, is to carefully manage that transition so that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. And again, the key word is sustainability. So as far as the role that I see myself playing, my hope, and these first 2 years in the legislature, I think, have demonstrated that I have a capacity to act as kind of a cultural translator. So I can understand Democrats, even though I don't agree with a lot of the things that they propose, and I can translate those things to my fellow Republicans when it makes sense and it's productive. And in a similar sense, even though I'm from a 96% white district, I can go to North Minneapolis, I can come down here, and I can talk to a community that's very different than the one that I represent, and I can listen to their stories, which, by the way, I find to be very heavily redacted. Like, only part of the story is getting out, and it's the politically useful parts to either side. And then go back to my district and tell people, hey, these folks aren't that different from you at all. They care about the same things, and try to bridge those gaps and build relationships that hopefully, because everything's about relationship, business, family, community, politics. the healthier relationships we build between communities, the closer we'll get to that vision of a state that's governed by peace and sustainability and productivity going forward.
Lastly, what is the last message that you would like to share with the Somali people and the Somali community who watch this TV?
Yeah.
And also all the minority people who we talked about a little bit at the beginning. What is the last message you would like to share with them?
I really appreciate that question, because I don't want to phrase this in the form of an apology, because I don't think that that's necessarily appropriate, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that Republicans have been terrible at listening and terrible at trying to listen. There's a certain political economy, right, where folks are looking to get the highest return on investment in the way that they spend both their time and their dollars. And so they'll go to places where they think the least amount of investment is going to generate the most amount of votes. And I get that. It's just a cold, hard reality of politics. But I only see elections as one half of our responsibility. The other half of our responsibility is, when we win, to actually represent people, and not just the people who voted for us, people everywhere. And so it's important for us to develop relationships in communities across the state, regardless of whether they're currently voting for us or not, so that when we do have the opportunity to bring our principles and values to bear, we can deliver for those people. And I think if we do that, then the elections will take care of themselves.
Thank you so very much for visiting and taking time with us. Hopefully, this is the first interview, and hopefully it's not going to be the last. And thank you for sharing the values and the common things that we share with the community.
Sure.
And maybe we will be hearing more, comments from the people as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you. daawadayaal, intaas ayay ku eg tahay waraysigii maanta aynu ka qaadaynay Representative Hudson oo nagu soo booqday Somali TV maanta si uu noola wadaago fariin uu rabay Soomaalida dhagahooda inuu gaaro. Aniga oo Maxamuud Diladeen ayaa idin la socodsiinayay, saaxiibkay Isma Musa iyo sidoo kale barnaamijka idin soo gudbiyay iyo sidoo kale Siyaad Saalax. Assalaamu calaykum.